white supremacy is this huge institution. The seed belief of it is that white people are superior to people of other races, and therefore they deserve to dominate over people of other races in all kinds of ways. And so the work is actually about undoing that belief.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbay. Welcome to the Contrary. This week, we continue our Women Thought Leader series with author Layla Saad. Saad explores race, identity, and social change on her weekly podcast and new book, Me and White Supremacy. Welcome, Layla.
Well, hi, thank you for having me, Bonnie.
Oh, happy to, and so happy for you, all your success.
Yeah.
Tell me about Me and White Supremacy. How did it start? How have you developed it?
Yeah, so Me and White Supremacy has been this incredible journey. But if you had looked at my career just even a few years ago, I wasn't doing this work. I was doing something entirely different. I was a life coach. I was a business coach. I worked with women often through a spiritual perspective. And it just so happened that a lot of my clients were actually white. And so that was my work for a really, really long time. But then in 2017, something happened that just shifted everything for me. And that got me started on this trajectory to doing anti-racism work. And that thing that happened was the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. That was August of 2017. You probably remember, Bonnie, seeing the images, right, from the news.
Sadly, and the death of the woman.
It was horrifying. What really stuck out for me, though, was seeing the images from the news of those men marching in the street. And there's one particular man in particular who was just screaming, I guess, a racial slur, but it was the look of absolute hatred and vitriol in his eyes that triggered me. And I had this moment of realizing that hate is directed at me, is directed at people who look like me. And I just needed to channel that into something. I had all of these feelings about it. And so I sat down and I wrote this article and I published it. And it was called, I Need to Talk to Spiritual White Women About White Supremacy. It was addressed to the white women who I'd been serving as a life coach and a business coach. And I was trying to say, look, we have this glaring big problem in this industry where we're talking about changing the world, helping people, but we don't look at racism. We're not really including Black and brown people in the conversation. And I was like, this is a mirror that I'm holding up to you. So that started the conversation for me of doing this very public work around anti-racism. And then fast forward a year later, I began becoming really curious. I wanted to know what people had learned about themselves and white supremacy since we were having these conversations. And so one night, I'm trying to sleep, and my husband's in the bed next to me snoring, and I couldn't sleep. And so it's 2 a.m. I grabbed my phone and just started writing notes on my phone. What have they learned about themselves and white supremacy? And I just was going to post it on my Instagram, just a question. But then I started thinking, well, what is white supremacy? It's a very big thing. It's tone policing, it's cultural appropriation, it's white feminism, it's white fragility, it's white privilege. And so I started creating this list of different aspects of white supremacy, and I had dozens of them. And so I realized this is more than just a single post. This is an entire journey that I want to lead people through of asking these questions. And so I just threw it up online. I was like, tomorrow we start a 28-day journey to examine you, your white privilege, your complicity in white supremacy. Come and tell the truth and come and go on this journey with me. And we did. And, it started under the hashtag Me and White Supremacy. And, I started the challenge. I had 19,000 followers. By the end of it, that number had more than doubled. And now, over 100,000 people have taken the challenge and done the work.
Now, let's get to the good responses and the responsible responses in a moment, but what about the irresponsible responses? I'm sure you've had death threats.
I haven't had death threats yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if they came, especially now that the book is going to be out in the world in a bigger way. It's going to be available to buy, to listen as an audiobook. But certainly I've had a lot of negative responses and feedback. And I think that comes with the territory of being a Black woman, a Black Muslim woman who has a voice, who is speaking on very challenging topic and something that's very confronting to a lot of people. I've had very vile comments and very vile emails sent to me. I've had...
Do you turn them over to authorities, or what do you do with them?
So what I do is, at the beginning, I didn't have an assistant. I didn't need one. When I first started writing, I Need to Talk to Spiritual White Women, I had a very small, email list of just 400 people. I just did everything myself. But as soon as those emails started pouring in, I realized I need a gatekeeper. So I have an assistant, and I ask her not to send me any of these emails and just to delete them. So that's what I do with that. During the challenge itself, though, we had a number of people who tried to derail what we were doing.
How?
They felt that I was trying to somehow mass brainwash white people into hating themselves. And so they would come into every day that we were doing the challenge and just write all of these comments, and I would have to be constantly blocking them.
Where were they coming from politically? I mean, were they white supremacists, or were they just people who said, I'm a feminist, but I don't have white privilege. Why do you, something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So oftentimes these people don't have the courage to show up as themselves. So they will use a masked account. They will not put their picture there. They will not have their face there. So we don't really know who they are. And so they don't have the courage to show up and stand up for what they, what they're really saying. So it's hard to know who they are, but oftentimes the place it was coming from was a very anti-Black, Islamophobic, very right-wing, not necessarily progressive. Those who
all progressives fall in with you right away?
No, and that's and that this book is definitely for everybody who has white privilege to do, but not everybody is open to the conversation yet, especially because a lot of people who already see themselves as woke, already believe that they are anti-racist. They believe they're the exception. I'm one of the good ones, so why should I have to do this? Or they believe I'm colorblind, or I have a Black friend or a person of color who's a family member. So they don't think that they have to do the work. They may think other white people have to do the work, but not them.
All right, let's get into it. Tell me, what is the work that people with white privilege, meaning all white people, have to do?
Yeah. So white supremacy is this huge institution. It's systemic and it's global. It's all over the world. And people often feel like, who am I to be able to affect any kind of change? I'm not a political leader. I don't have a platform. I don't have the kind of power that I can actually change things in a substantive way. But what white supremacy is, the seed belief of it is that white people are superior to people of other races, and therefore they deserve to dominate over people of other races in all kinds of way. And so the work is actually about undoing that belief that I am superior to people of other races. And the way that I present this through Me and White Supremacy is through taking people through this 28-day journey of looking at different aspects of white supremacy, how they enact it in their personal lives, and getting them to ask critical questions to really examine, why do I actually do that? What is it that I actually believe? Because people often think that they have, they often are aware of their conscious beliefs. They're not aware of their unconscious beliefs. They're consciously chosen beliefs. And because everyone knows, those who are, yes, I'm anti-racist, they believe it's wrong to treat people differently of different races. It's wrong to do that. But underneath the surface, at some level, they believe, but those people are lesser than me. So when it happens to them, it happens because they are lesser than me. And what I'm getting people to do is to go beyond the conscious thought to get to the unconscious thought and start working on that and create change from within.
So what do you believe their unconscious thoughts are? Why is somebody getting ahead of me? I just lost a promotion to an African American. And so what kind of stuff does that trigger in a white person's head in terms of white privilege?
It was really interesting doing the challenge because I got to see all of what they actually believe. So one of the days that was very hard for me was the day on You and Black Women. And I asked people to really consider, what do they really think about Black women? And some of the things that came up were very interesting. The first conscious thought was, I admire Black women. I think that they're so powerful. They are Black girl magic. I'm jealous of them even. But when we force them to go deeper and really examine, things came out such as, I feel that Black women are aggressive and scary. I'm surprised when I see a Black woman in a position of leadership. I wonder how she got there. I don't know how to act around a Black woman. I'm either stepping away from her or I'm trying to make her be my friend. And I don't.
The crazy thing about it is, about a week ago, I read an article. It was a Caucasian guy and a Black guy. Both was applying for the same managerial job. When the Black guy got the job, immediately the Caucasian guy screamed DEI and was loud about it. I mean, very loud about it. They had to explain to him the reasons why they chose the Black guy over him. First off, the Caucasian guy showed up late for the interview. He was over an hour late. Secondly, the Caucasian guy only speaks English. The Black guy speaks 3 languages, working on the 4th. And even with that being said, even though they both had the experience, he still screamed DEI.
Don't do that with white women. I know how to be with white women in a way that's natural. And so that's what's underneath the surface.
Very, very interesting. White privilege itself is a pretty prickly term. There are still a lot of poor whites in America,
Yes.
in England too, where you're originally from. But there are a lot of people who might say, you know, I grew up in a trailer park.
Yeah.
I had to work my behind off to get into college. I had friends of all colors. I saw African American and Hispanic kids my same age get into better schools because of their races, and the Supreme Court has ruled that as long as it's one of many issues that the school considers, race can be taken into account when admitting people to college.
Yeah.
So let's say you run into one of them.
Yeah. I think.
And do you say that they've had white privilege?
Yeah. So I think this is such an important question because the word privilege really does trigger people because they feel like I haven't lived a privileged life, right? I grew up, as you said, poor. I didn't have all of those things. And so I struggled. The key thing to remember here is you struggled, but your struggle wasn't because you were white. Your struggle had nothing to do with your race. It had to do with other things, but it wasn't because of your race. And that there are things that you will have, even though you are poor.
Maybe it was, though.
Not on a mass level, yeah.
But, you know, I'm 65 years old. My mother, when my parents met, actually my birth mother died when I was 1 year old, so it was my stepmother. But she was at Sarah Lawrence College, and my father was a poor kid from Brooklyn, and we were living and they were commuting, which was a long way to see each other. My father tried to get an apartment in Westchester County, where her college was, and no Jews allowed. And, you know, they'd try to rent. They were told it was taken. The next day it was in the newspaper again, in the classifieds.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is because, you know, America has a terrible history with, you know, now you could say it's Hispanics.
Yeah.
But in the right after around just before the turn of the 20th century, and really right after, when the great waves of immigration were Italians and Jews, they were not white. WASPs were white.
Yeah.
Sometimes even Catholics weren't white.
Right.
White Catholics. Yeah. So we have a history of excluding certain groups, in fact, larger groups of white people than there are WASPs in this country.
Well, I would say, I mean, I think the example that you gave of it was no Jews, right? So it was specifically not because they were white, it was because they were Jews. But in the history of this country, certainly there has been this evolving definition of what does it mean to be white. Race isn't a real biological fact, it's a social construct. And over the years, who has been counted as white has evolved over time. It's different now than it was in the past. And so what people in the modern day need to understand is white supremacy has set things up in such a way that if you are seen as white or you pass as white, you will be treated differently, better than if you are seen as black or brown.
Tell me about white supremacy and feminism. I've covered the movement since the 70s and 80s, and there was certainly a big issue in the movement, I would say, starting 10 or 20 years after second wave feminism, after Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem. The whole Sojourner Truth thing of ripping her shirt open and saying, "Ain't I a woman?"
Yeah.
And there were some African American women, not as many as there should have been, not as many. There was Shirley Chisholm who ran for president, who was a big feminist and paraded and protested with feminists. Dorothy Height there were some. But there certainly weren't equal numbers. So tell me about that. Are feminists, are white feminists privileged in your mind?
So I think it's really important for people to understand when we say white feminists or white feminism, what that means, because that can also be a very triggering term for a lot of people. White feminism doesn't mean you're a feminist who happens to be white. White feminism is actually a feminism that centers only at the intersection or the section of gender only. And often who it serves is white women, often women who are cisgendered and heterosexual as well. And so white feminism is a feminism that says, let's only focus on our struggles under patriarchy and sexism. We will deal with racism and all the other isms after we have figured this out. And a lot of Black women and women of color struggle with feminism, with the feminist movement, with the sisterhood, because they feel like they've had to chop parts of themselves off in order to fit in. It's certainly for me how I felt when in having conversations with white women, when they've said to me, why don't have these conversations because you're causing division. Let us only focus on gender, and then we will, because that's the uniting thing, is that we're both women, right? And so for me, I'm like, yeah, I am a woman, but I'm also a Black woman, and I'm not a woman and then Black. I'm Black and woman simultaneously. And if the feminist movement doesn't take all of that into account, my entire humanity, then it doesn't really fully serve me. And so what white feminism does is it actually continues to perpetuate white supremacy, because it primarily serves white women, which means it says white women are superior to women of other races, which is what white supremacy is.
So what should women of color who consider themselves feminists do? Should they form their own organizations? What's your advice to them?
Women of color who are feminists have already been doing that for a very long time.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, part of what you're saying to me sounds like conversations that were had 20 years ago, but now you've had an Asian American and an African American currently head of Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
You've and former, I believe there's been a former head of Planned Parenthood who was African American, who was fabulous, who lasted for about 20 years. So I'm thinking you're maybe those conversations that happened a lot more 20, 30 years ago.
They're still happening today, unfortunately.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they are still happening today.
Why does change take so damn long?
It takes so long. I remember reading, one of my favorite writers and just leaders is Audre Lorde, and I remember reading her book, Sister Outsider, and thinking she could be here today saying these exact same things. And that
Let me know your favorite Audre Lorde book in the comments.
That made me really, really sad. Yeah.
So, when you talk to white people who've been through your program, How do they change? How do you change them?
Just the transformation has been so incredible. To give you a few different examples, because I think it can be helpful for people to know what that looks like in real life. There are parents who are white who have children who are biracial. They've been able to stand up for their kids who've experienced racism in a way that they hadn't before. I remember I received an email from a black woman.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
A woman with a biracial child. Is she still a white supremacist?
So
or white privilege?
She's still, so she still owns white privilege. Yes,
Okay.
as long as white supremacy is in place, she still owns white privilege, but she can use that privilege in a different way.
Okay.
And what she would have,
yeah.
So what she would have done in the past, her child faced bullying at school. Another kid didn't want to play with her because of the color of her skin. Her child came home and told her. In the past, she said she wouldn't have said anything because her inclination is don't rock the boat, don't make things uncomfortable, don't go and speak to the other parent. She said, I did the work and realized, how could I not? Right? And so she went and they had a very difficult and challenging conversation. But ultimately, she was able to stand up for her child in a way she wouldn't have been able to before. Another family situation, a black woman whose ex-husband was white and they have a biracial child. She said, before your work, being able to raise our child was very difficult because my white ex-husband couldn't understand what I was talking about when I would talk about racism and when I would talk about how we need to prepare our child. He did the workbook, and now it's facilitated a whole different kind of conversation between us. And so they're able to now co-parent, even as divorced parents, co-parent in a much better way for their child. So things like that just like move me so much.
You talk in your book about becoming good ancestors. What does that mean?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say where that comes from for me, because when I started doing this work with the I Need to Talk to Spiritual White Women letter, I was very suddenly, immersed into this conversation because it went very viral very quickly. And I wasn't really prepared for the backlash that I would get and the protest and the resistance. And so I got burned out very, very quickly. And so in choosing to continue this work and choosing to follow this calling of doing this work, I needed something greater than myself to pull me forward. Why am I doing this?
It must have been, here you are at a laptop in Doha, where you live, totally isolated from what's going on in the UK or the EU or the United States or Australia, all these countries where you have quite a bit of focus.
Yeah.
That must have been really hard.
It was,
but please finish telling me.
It was very, very hard, and it impacted my energy, and it was impacting, how I was able to show up as a wife and a mother and everything else, because we're so interconnected these days with the internet, that every time I would open my phone, there would be something there. And so that almost burnt me out. But this idea of becoming a good ancestor became the thing that pulls me forward. That I'm not just doing this for me now, I'm doing it for my children, for my children's children, that I don't want any black child to feel that they are inferior, and I don't want them to have to live in a world that treats them as such. And so I talk to people about that because that's what helped me. And I think for a lot of white people and people who hold white privilege, doing this work is really, really challenging. And at the end, that you don't necessarily get like an award for doing it, right? The payoff is things have to change and you have to lose privilege. So why do it? And so the way that I try to inspire people to do the work is you can create a whole different world right now. If you choose to do this work, you change the trajectory for everybody. And so that's why I do this work.
Well, when you say that there isn't an award and sometimes there may be losses should white people step aside when there's a black candidate for a job they both want and the white person gets it.
I don't necessarily think that's what I'm asking people to do. I think what I'm asking people to do is to be aware of the fact that racism does exist, that you will be treated differently than your peer who is a different color, and not to deny it, not to say things like I'm colorblind or racism doesn't exist or the reason they haven't got ahead is just because they're just not as good as me.
And last question, we don't have a lot of time, and it could take forever, but does white privilege extend to, say, Asian Americans, wealthy Asian Americans? There are plenty of them. and they're banding together politically and in many ways. I just take them as one example of people of color. But does white privilege and owning up to it, is it more than just white people who have to do it?
Well, I think I want to separate two things. Wealth and class is its own privilege, and that's not white privilege, that's economic privilege. But certainly there has been a way in which being able to maybe pass as white or being able to assimilate in other kinds of ways comes with a certain amount of privilege. But have no doubt about it, those people also are impacted by white supremacy in ways that are very harmful.
And what should they do about it?
I also invite people who
to read your book and to go
right.
through
So
the program.
because when I talk about who this work is for, I actually don't say it's for white people. I say it's for people who hold white privilege, and who I include in that is, can you pass as white? I spoke to a woman yesterday who's Palestinian, and she said, "Thank you for saying that because I'm fully Palestinian, but unless I tell you, you don't really know." And so I have to do the work too.
And we were talking earlier about like Ariana Grande, who,
right?
Has a Latina name but looks very white.
Yes. So, for a very long time, I thought Ariana Grande was a woman of color. And that's because she uses makeup that makes her look racially ambiguous. And I think that's somebody who plays that line in order to be able to, benefit off of Black or brown culture, but still who has white privilege. And I think that's something that people just need to be aware of.
And lastly, please tell me the name of your book again so people could look for it and go to your website and buy it.
It's called Me and White Supremacy.
And they just go, is that your website's name?
So my website is leilafsaad.com, but you can find where to order the book at meandwhitesupremacybook.com.
Terrific.
Thank
you. It's been fabulous meeting you, and good luck in your work and good luck in your growing global influence.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
That's it.
Okay, so if you made it to this point of the video, I'm going to need for you to do me a favor, okay? Drop the 4-letter word love in the comments, okay? The reason why I want love in the comments, not only to show that you watched the entire video, but to kind of bring some united front, that we are all of one race, the human race. So drop that love in the comments. Also, tell me, what do you think your definition of white supremacy and white privilege is? I often hear people say stuff like, "Oh, I was raised poor. I don't have white privilege." And to them, I assume that's their definition of white privilege. But what does it mean to you? Also, please share this video with anyone you deem necessary. Put some comments in the comment section because I love to hear your opinion on situations. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.